My son took my keys, the old man whispered, and the way he said it made the bikers stop talking. It was 8:47 on a wet Thursday night outside the Hollow Creek Veterans Outreach Clinic, where the last yellow lights were still burning above the glass doors and rainwater was running in thin silver lines across the parking lot. Vernon Slate had only come there to pick up a friend from a support meeting. He was 61, broad through the shoulders, white, gray-bearded, and quiet in the way old bikers sometimes are when life has taught them not to waste words. A pale scar ran from his left cheekbone down toward his jaw, half hidden by his beard. His black leather vest was worn soft at the edges, and his 2009 Harley-Davidson Road King sat under the clinic awning, ticking faintly as the engine cooled. The air smelled like wet asphalt, vending machine coffee, and the sharp wintergreen scent of the liniment someone had spilled near the entrance. Vernon was standing beside two other riders when he noticed the old man. The man was white, thin, maybe late 70s, wearing a brown wool coat that had soaked dark at the shoulders. His name, Vernon would learn later, was Bernard Halston, 78 years old, retired clock repairman, widower, a man who looked as if he had spent his life fixing small, delicate things, and now could not fix the one thing breaking in front of him. Bernard stood beneath the clinic awning with both hands tucked into his coat pockets, staring toward the far end of the parking lot. Every few seconds, his eyes moved to the road, then back to the ground. He was not calling anyone. He was not asking for a ride. He was simply waiting, like a man who had been told his own choices were no longer his. Vernon watched him for nearly a full minute before stepping closer, careful not to crowd him. "You waiting for someone, sir?" Bernard looked up too quickly, as if he had been caught doing something wrong. His face carried that strained politeness older men use when they are trying not to become anyone's burden. "I'm all right," he said, but his voice shook. Vernon glanced at the empty patient drop-off lane. A blue sedan sat alone near the second light pole, its windows filmed with rain. "That your car?" Bernard's eyes flicked toward it. "Yes. Need help starting it?" The old man swallowed. His right hand moved inside his pocket, searching for something that was not there. Then he leaned closer, just enough for Vernon to hear him under the rain. "My son took my keys." The words were small, almost embarrassed. But Vernon had heard enough pain in quiet voices to know when a sentence was only the top layer. Behind them, the clinic door slid open, and Janice, the receptionist who also handled after-hours intake, stepped out holding a paper cup that cost $1.25 from the vending machine. She looked at Bernard, then at Vernon, and her face tightened with recognition. "Mr. Halston," she said gently, "your ride still hasn't come?" Bernard gave a quick, apologetic smile. "He'll come. He's busy." Vernon noticed the old man said it like he had practiced it, like an answer prepared in advance, like a shield too thin to stop anything. Rain struck the roof above them in a steady rhythm. 3 motorcycles stood silent behind Vernon, dark shapes under clinic lights. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Bernard whispered again, not to Vernon exactly, not to anyone, maybe only to the rain. He said, "I don't need them anymore." Vernon's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Come inside for a minute," he said. "No rush." Bernard looked afraid of accepting even that much kindness. And that was when Vernon understood the keys were not the whole story. Inside the Hollow Creek Veterans Outreach Clinic, the waiting room had that late-night emptiness that makes every small sound feel larger than it should. The overhead lights hummed softly above rows of blue plastic chairs. A wall clock showed 8:56, and the only television in the corner played a weather report with the volume turned low. Bernard sat near the door instead of deeper inside, as if he did not believe he was allowed to stay. Vernon noticed that first. Then he noticed the second thing. Bernard kept apologizing. "I'm sorry for the trouble," the old man said when the receptionist offered him a towel. "I'm sorry," he said when Vernon placed the vending machine coffee on the small table beside him. "I didn't mean to keep anyone here." The coffee was thin, bitter, and too hot, the kind sold for $1.25 in a paper cup with a weak plastic lid, but Bernard held it with both hands like it was something generous. Vernon sat 2 chairs away, not beside him, close enough to listen, far enough to let the old man breathe. The other 2 bikers, Curtis and Neil, remained near the window, quiet as furniture, their wet leather vests dripping onto the gray floor tiles. Nobody crowded Bernard. Nobody asked him to explain too quickly. That mattered. Your son know you're here? Vernon asked. Bernard nodded at once. Too fast. Yes. Trevor followed me here this afternoon, took my keys after I parked, and said he'd come back when he was done with errands. And your car? Bernard looked toward the glass doors, though the blue sedan was barely visible through the rain. It's mine. A 1998 Buick LeSabre. Still runs fine. Only has 92,000 miles. My wife picked the color. Said blue looked honest. A faint smile passed over his face and disappeared almost before it arrived. I used to drive it every Tuesday. Grocery store. Clinic. Sometimes the old road by the rail depot, just to sit near the maple trees. Vernon heard the carefulness in that sentence. He did not comment on the old route. He did not ask about the wife. He only said, sounds like you knew your route. Bernard looked down into the coffee. I did. One sentence. Heavy as a locked door. Janice, the after-hours intake receptionist with tired eyes and a navy cardigan, lowered her voice from behind the counter. Mr. Halston had a consultation today. Bernard stiffened slightly. Just paperwork, he said. Nothing serious. Paperwork for what? Vernon asked gently. Bernard rubbed his thumb along the rim of the cup. Senior transportation. Home support. Things like that. Not because Trevor is bad. He's not bad. The words came quickly, lined up like little soldiers. He's under pressure. His business slowed down. His back bothers him. He worries too much. Vernon said nothing. Bernard kept going because silence often invites truth better than questions do. He says driving makes me confused. But I don't get confused driving. I get confused when people keep telling me I am. Vernon's eyes lifted. Across the room, Curtis stopped looking out the window. Bernard seemed to realize he had said too much. His shoulders rounded inward, and he tried to cover it with another apology. I shouldn't talk like that. He's my boy. Vernon leaned forward, elbows on his knees, scar pale under the clinic light. His voice stayed low. A man can love his son and still need his own keys. Bernard closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. But when he opened them, the fear had not left. It had only become visible. Outside, headlights swept across the wet glass doors. A dark SUV turned into the lot and slowed near the entrance. Bernard's fingers tightened around the coffee cup until the lid bent inward. That's him, he whispered. Trevor Halston parked close to the entrance, too close to the painted curb. The front wheels of his black 2021 Ford Explorer turned slightly, as if he had stopped in a hurry but wanted it to look casual. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Bernard stared at the headlights through the rain-streaked glass. Janice stood behind the counter with one hand resting near the phone. Vernon remained seated, but something in the room changed around him, the way a room changes when a storm moves from outside to inside. Trevor stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and a clean white shirt open at the collar. He was 46, white, well-kept, with the kind of practiced smile men use when they want witnesses to remember them as reasonable. He did not run through the rain. He walked quickly, head lowered, one hand raised against the weather, then entered through the sliding doors with a burst of cold air and wet pavement smell behind him. Dad? He said, warm enough for everyone to hear. There you are. Bernard did not answer. He looked down at the bent coffee lid in his hands. Trevor's eyes moved once around the room, over Janice, over Curtis and Neil by the window, then stopped on Vernon's vest and scarred face. His smile thinned, but only for a moment. I'm sorry if he bothered anyone, Trevor said. He gets anxious when he's tired. Vernon watched Bernard's shoulders rise. Not much. Just enough. He didn't bother anyone, Janice said. He was waiting for transportation. Trevor gave a soft laugh. Not loud, not rude, but shaped like correction. Transportation? He has me. He turned toward Bernard. Come on, Dad. It's almost 9:15. You've had a long day. Bernard's mouth opened, then closed. Trevor moved closer and reached for the coffee cup as if removing it would make leaving easier. Bernard let him take it. That was the first thing Vernon marked. The second was Trevor's hand slipping into his overcoat pocket, where a small metal sound clicked against something hard. Bernard heard it too. His eyes flicked to the pocket. Vernon saw that. You got his keys? Vernon asked. Trevor paused, cup in hand. Excuse me. His car keys. Trevor smiled again, wider now, for the room. I keep them for safety. He forgets things. Bernard whispered. Not the road. It was so quiet it almost vanished under the rain. But Vernon heard it. Curtis heard it. Janice heard it. Trevor turned his head slowly toward his father, and his voice stayed pleasant while his eyes did not. Dad, we talked about this. Bernard shrank back into the chair. Vernon stood then, not fast, not dramatic. Just stood, at 6 feet 2, with rain still shining on his leather shoulders. He seemed to take up more space than the room had offered him. Maybe he'd like to talk about it again, Vernon said. Trevor looked at him carefully. This is a family matter. Vernon nodded once. Then let him speak like family. The room went still. Trevor looked at Bernard, waiting with that same polished smile. Bernard stared at the floor tiles, at the dark drops falling from Trevor's coat, at the paper cup now crushed slightly in his son's hand. His lips trembled, but no words came. Trevor spread his arms as if that proved everything. See? He's exhausted. Vernon did not look away from Bernard. Mr. Halston, he said, calm and low. Do you want to leave with him tonight? Trevor answered at once. Of course he does. Vernon turned his eyes to Trevor then, and the silence that followed made even the wall clock sound loud. I asked him. For a moment, Trevor's smile stayed on his face without belonging to it. It was still there, neat and practiced, but the warmth had gone out of it. He looked from Vernon to Bernard, then to Janice behind the counter, measuring the room as if deciding which version of himself would work best. Dad, he said softly, tell the man you're ready to go. Bernard's hands tightened around nothing now that the coffee was gone. His fingers curled and uncurled against his knees, pale and thin under the clinic lights. He began, then stopped. Trevor took one step closer. Not enough to look threatening. Enough for Bernard to feel it. Vernon shifted half a step into the space between them, casual as a man moving out of someone's way, except he was not moving away. Curtis and Neil stayed by the window, but both had turned fully toward the scene. Their faces gave away nothing. Their silence did. He has an appointment tomorrow, Trevor said, looking at Janice now. I manage his schedule. I manage his medication reminders, his bills, his house maintenance, everything. He gets overwhelmed. He came here today because he misunderstood a pamphlet. Bernard's eyes lifted at that word. Misunderstood. It landed on him harder than Trevor's raised voice would have. I didn't misunderstand, Bernard said. The sentence was small, but it was clear. Trevor blinked once. Dad, I asked about transportation, Bernard continued, staring at his own shoes. And home support. Just information. Trevor let out a careful breath, the kind meant to make other people feel unreasonable. Because someone put the idea in your head that you can still do everything alone. Vernon noticed Janice's jaw tighten. He noticed Bernard's face close again. He also noticed the key ring sound from Trevor's pocket when the man adjusted his coat. A small metallic clink. A tiny noise. But Bernard reacted to it like a leash had been pulled. Vernon's voice dropped lower. Mr. Halston, where are your keys right now? Bernard did not look at Trevor. In his pocket. Trevor gave a short, controlled laugh. For safety. Did you give them to him? Vernon asked. Bernard swallowed. He took them from the ignition after I parked here this afternoon. Trevor's eyes sharpened. Because you left the stove on. Bernard looked up then, wounded more than angry. That was 7 months ago. The burner was off. The red light was stuck. You know that. The waiting room changed again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough that every person present understood a little more than they had before. Janice moved closer to the counterphone. Curtis crossed his arms. Neil lowered his chin. Vernon did not move. Trevor saw all of it and adjusted quickly. This is exactly what I mean, he said. He fixates on details. He gets confused. He shouldn't be driving. Bernard whispered. I drove 54 years without a serious accident. That was before, Trevor said. Before what? Vernon asked. Trevor turned on him. Before he got old. One sentence. Clean. Honest by accident. Bernard flinched as if the word had weight. Vernon let the silence sit there until Trevor seemed to hear himself. Rain tracked down the glass doors behind him. The clock above the television clicked to 9:18. Janice finally spoke, careful and professional. Mr. Halston, our clinic can contact an after-hours senior advocate if you'd like someone neutral to talk with you. Trevor's face hardened, then smoothed again. That won't be necessary. Bernard looked at the phone, then at Vernon, then at the pocket where his keys waited beside his son's hand. His lips parted, but fear caught the words halfway out. Vernon stepped back just enough to give the old man a clear line of sight to Janice. No rush, he said. You get to answer. Bernard breathed in slowly through his nose. It sounded thin, like the first turn of a rusted lock. I would like, he said, each word costing him something, to talk to someone. Trevor's polished smile finally disappeared. Janice picked up the phone with the kind of calm that comes from years of handling rooms where people pretend nothing is wrong. She did not make a show of it. She did not accuse Trevor. She simply turned slightly away, dialed the after-hours senior advocate line taped beside the counter, and gave Bernard's name, age, and location in a steady voice. Trevor watched her do it, and for the first time that night, his control began to show its seams. "This is unnecessary," he said. Nobody answered. That seemed to bother him more than disagreement would have. He looked at Bernard, lowering his voice into something private while still standing in a public room. "Dad, you're tired. You're making this bigger than it is." Bernard's eyes dropped again. Habit pulled harder than courage. Vernon saw it happen. The old man's shoulders bent, his mouth closed, and the apology almost came back to his face. Almost. Then Vernon spoke, not to Trevor, but to Bernard. "You used to fix clocks?" Bernard blinked, caught off guard. "Yes." "What kind?" Bernard looked uncertain, as if the question belonged to another life. "Mantle clocks mostly. Cuckoo clocks sometimes. Pocket watches if folks still had them. I had a bench on Laramie Street for 41 years. Vernon nodded toward Trevor's coat pocket. "That gear on your keychain. You made it." Bernard's hand moved, empty, toward where keys should have been. From a broken regulator wheel. "Brass. My wife said it looked foolish, but she kept touching it when she rode with me." For the first time since Trevor entered, Bernard's voice warmed around something that belonged only to him. Curtis glanced at Neil. Janice, still on the phone, looked back over her shoulder. Trevor stepped in quickly. "Dad, nobody needs the family history." Bernard went still. Vernon's eyes did not leave Trevor's face. "Maybe he does." 3 words. Quiet. Hard enough to hold the room. Trevor let out a breath and shifted the crushed coffee cup from one hand to the other. "You people don't understand what it's like. I'm the one there every day. I'm the one getting calls when he misplaces things. I'm the one paying for repairs. I'm the one cleaning up." Bernard stared at him. "You sold my tools." Trevor froze. It was the first thing Bernard had said that Trevor had not prepared for. The waiting room seemed to narrow around that sentence. Vernon did not react, and because he did not react, everyone listened harder. Bernard's voice trembled, but it kept moving. "You said the basement needed space. You said I didn't use them anymore. But my staking set was there. My loop. The little drawers with the balance staffs. You sold them for $400. I saw the buyer's message on your phone when you left it open." Trevor's face flushed. "They were rusting. They were mine." One sentence. This time it did not shake. Janice lowered the phone slightly, listening while the advocate remained on the line. Trevor looked around the room and seemed to understand that the story had changed without his permission. It was no longer an old man being difficult. It was a pattern. Keys. Tools. Appointments. Words answered for him. Vernon finally asked the question that had been waiting since the rain began. "Mr. Halston, did you come here tonight because you wanted help staying independent?" Bernard looked at his son. Love was still there. That made it worse. Then he looked at Vernon. "I came because I wanted to ask before I disappeared from my own life." Trevor said his father's name sharply, but Vernon stepped fully between them now, broad, still, and calm. Not touching him, not threatening him, just ending the space Trevor had been using to reach the old man. "Let him finish," Vernon said. And this time, Bernard did. Bernard did not speak right away. He seemed to test the room first, the way a cautious man tests a stair before putting his weight on it. Trevor stood beyond Vernon's shoulder, breathing through his nose, his polished shoes leaving dark rain marks on the tile. Janice stayed on the phone, saying only enough to keep the advocate connected. Curtis and Neil remained near the window, still as old fence posts under fluorescent light. Nobody pushed Bernard. Nobody rescued his sentence for him. That was what made him finally continue. "He started with the car," Bernard said. "Said night driving was dangerous. I agreed with that. I don't like headlights in the rain anymore." He looked toward the glass doors, where Trevor's black Explorer sat under the lights, its headlights still cutting across the rain. Then he said mornings were no good either, because traffic was heavier. Then afternoons, because I might get tired. Pretty soon, there wasn't a safe hour left. Trevor's voice cut in, tight but controlled. "That is not fair." Vernon did not turn. "You'll have your turn." Trevor's mouth closed. Bernard's eyes flicked up, surprised that someone had said the simple thing he had not been able to say for months. He took another breath. Then he kept the keys. Said he would drive me anywhere I needed. But when I asked to go somewhere, he'd ask why. Then he'd ask who would be there. Then he'd say maybe tomorrow. His hands trembled on his knees, but he did not hide them now. Tomorrow got very long. The words settled into the waiting room. Janice's face softened, but her voice into the phone stayed professional. Yes, he is stating that clearly, she said. Trevor stepped sideways, trying to regain Bernard's view. Vernon moved just enough to block him again. Not aggressively. Precisely. Trevor's jaw tightened. You have no right to interfere with my father. Vernon looked at him then. I'm not interfering with your father. I'm listening to him. One sentence. It landed harder than anger. The advocate's voice was faint through the phone, asking Janice if Bernard felt safe leaving with his son that night. Janice repeated the question aloud, careful and plain. Bernard's face folded with pain. He loved Trevor. That much was obvious. It was in the way he could barely look at him and still wanted to protect him. I don't think he means to scare me, Bernard whispered. Trevor seized on it. Exactly. Bernard flinched at the interruption, then forced himself to continue. But I am scared. This time, nobody moved. Even the rain outside seemed quieter. Trevor's expression changed from offense to disbelief, then to something colder. Dad, after everything I've done for you? Bernard's eyes filled, but his voice steadied. You do things for me. Then you decide that means you own the rest. Janice repeated Bernard's statement quietly into the phone. Vernon could see Trevor realizing that the room had become a record without anyone needing a camera. Witnesses. Time. Words. The truth did not need drama. It only needed air. Trevor reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the key ring, and held it up with a strained smile. The brass gear turned under the clinic lights. Fine, he said, forcing a smile for Janice and the open phone line. If this little performance is about keys, take them. But he did not hand them to Bernard. He held them out toward Vernon, as if the old man still did not count. Vernon did not reach for them. They're not mine, he said. Bernard slowly stood. His knees made the motion difficult. His coat hung damp and heavy. He extended one shaking hand toward his son. Trevor hesitated, and in that hesitation, the whole room heard what Bernard had been unable to say. Finally, Trevor placed the keys in his father's palm. Bernard closed his fingers around the brass gear like it was warm. Then Janice asked the advocate's final question. Mr. Halston, do you want to go home with Trevor tonight? Or would you like help arranging another safe place until morning? Bernard looked at the keys, then at Vernon, then at his son. Not with him, he said. Not tonight. Trevor stared at Bernard as if the words had come from someone else. For all his talk about confusion, he seemed to be the one unable to understand a plain sentence. Not with me, he repeated, softer than before, but not kinder. Bernard held the key ring in both hands now, the brass gear pressed between his thumbs. Not tonight, he said again. Vernon watched Trevor's face work through its choices. Anger would make him look guilty. Begging would make him look weak. Smiling had stopped working. So Trevor reached for the oldest tool he had left. Shame. You're going to do this in front of strangers? He asked. Bernard's chin lowered. The question found its mark. Vernon saw the old man's body begin to fold inward, saw months of habit tugging him back toward silence. So Vernon did the only useful thing. He made the room simple. He answered you in front of witnesses, Vernon said. That matters. Trevor turned toward him. You don't know our family. I know, he answered the question. That was all Vernon gave him. 3 steady beats. 1 line. Janice repeated Bernard's choice to the advocate, then listened. Her pen moved across a yellow intake pad, writing down the time, 9:31 p.m. The clinic address, Bernard's full name, and the fact that he had declined to leave with his son that night. She did not make it dramatic. She made it official. That frightened Trevor more than the bikers did. This is ridiculous, he said, pulling his phone from his coat. I'll call someone who actually has authority. You can, Janice said calmly. The advocate is already documenting the request for emergency overnight assistance and a follow-up welfare check. Trevor's thumb hovered over his screen. For the first time, he looked unsure where to aim his confidence. Bernard remained standing, but his knees trembled under the damp weight of his trousers. Vernon noticed and slid a chair closer with his boot, not touching Bernard, not making him feel frail, just placing help within reach. Bernard sat, slowly, still clutching the keys. Neil stepped outside and turned off the Explorer's open glare by standing between its headlights and the clinic doors. Curtis walked to the vending machine and bought a bottle of water for $1.10, setting it near Bernard without a word. Small things. Real things. The kind no one makes speeches about. Trevor saw them and seemed irritated by their gentleness. He looked at his father. So what now? You're going to let motorcycle men decide your life. Bernard took the water bottle but did not open it. No, he said. His voice was tired, but it belonged to him. I'm going to decide one night. The words were not grand. They did not fix a family, but they gave the room something to stand on. Janice covered the phone and said, Mr. Halston, the advocate can contact the County Elder Services line and request emergency overnight assistance. If they approve it, a contracted driver may be able to come within 40 to 60 minutes. You may also request a follow-up appointment about transportation and home support. Bernard looked at the rain beyond the glass. 40 minutes sounded like a lifetime and a mercy at once. Trevor stepped forward again. Vernon moved with him, not blocking the exit, not cornering him, only standing where pressure had no path to Bernard. He has his keys, Trevor said. Let him drive himself if he's so independent. Bernard's eyes closed briefly. Vernon answered before the old man had to carry that insult. A man can hold his keys and still accept a ride in the rain. Curtis nodded once from the window. Janice repeated the arrangement into the phone. Trevor looked around and found no one willing to help him shrink the old man back down. At 9:36, he put his phone away. You know this is going to make tomorrow harder, he told Bernard. Bernard looked at the brass gear in his palm. Maybe, he said. Then he looked up, and his voice steadied. But tonight, I'll remember choosing it. The 40 minutes that followed did not feel like waiting. They felt like holding a door open against weather. Trevor remained near the entrance for the first 10, pacing between the glass doors and the corner where the brochures sat in neat plastic slots. Every few steps, his shoes clicked on the tile with the same controlled impatience he had brought into the room. He made 2 calls, both quiet, both turned slightly away, and each time his voice grew smaller because there was no audience left willing to accept his version without question. Bernard sat with the bottle of water unopened beside him and the key ring resting in his palm. The brass gear had left a red half-moon mark in his skin from how tightly he held it. Vernon noticed, but did not tell him to relax. A man who had just taken back a piece of himself was allowed to hold on too hard for a while. Janice brought out a thin clinic blanket from a cabinet behind the counter, the kind washed too many times and folded into a square. They said the driver's name is Louise, she told Bernard. White van. County Senior Respite Program. If the request is approved, the county can cover the first night through emergency assistance. They'll call me when the driver is close. Bernard nodded. I can pay something. Not tonight, Janice said. The first night is covered. The old man looked embarrassed by mercy, so Vernon changed the shape of the moment. That Buick out there, he said, nodding toward the rain-dark window. You keep up with the oil? Bernard blinked, then gave the smallest honest smile. Every 3,000 miles. Whether it needs it or not. Good man. Trevor says that's wasteful. Vernon glanced at the son, who was staring into his phone. Some people call care wasteful when it doesn't belong to them. Bernard looked down, not sure whether to accept that sentence, but it settled somewhere near him. At 9:58, headlights rolled slowly across the front glass, lower and softer than Trevor's SUV. A white county van pulled into the patient drop-off lane, its wipers moving steadily. Trevor saw it and stepped toward Bernard one last time. Dad, don't make me explain this to everyone tomorrow. There it was again. Not worry. Reputation. Bernard's hand closed around the keys. His mouth trembled. Vernon stood beside his chair, not in front of him this time. Beside him. You don't owe anyone a performance, he said. Trevor's face tightened. Stay out of this. Vernon's voice stayed even. I am. Then he looked at Bernard. You're the one in it. 3 beats. One choice. Bernard rose slowly. Curtis picked up the blanket and placed it over the old man's shoulders. Neil opened the clinic door, letting in the smell of rain and cold exhaust. Janice walked ahead with the intake paper in her hand. Trevor did not move aside at first. He stood in the path, close enough to make Bernard stop. Vernon did not touch him. He simply stepped next to Bernard, scarred face calm. leather vest dark with dried rain, and waited. Curtis and Neil came up on the other side, not surrounding Trevor, not threatening him, only making the hallway wider for the man who had been made to feel small. Trevor looked at the three bikers, then at Janice watching from the doorway, then at the county driver waiting under the van's interior light. Slowly, he shifted back. Bernard walked past him, not proudly, not quickly, but on his own feet, with his own keys in his hand. At the door, he paused and turned to his son. For a second, the whole room expected anger, or apology, or one more attempt to soften the truth. Bernard gave none of those. He only said, "I'll call you tomorrow, Trevor, when I'm ready." Then he stepped into the rain. The county van did not pull away quickly. Louise, the driver, waited until Bernard was seated, until the blanket was tucked over his knees, until Janice had handed over the intake paper and confirmed the respite address twice. Bernard sat behind the rain-streaked window with the key ring still in his hand, the brass gear resting against his thumb. Trevor stood under the clinic awning, staring at the van as if the night had taken something from him. Vernon stood a few feet away, silent, giving no speech and taking no victory. This had never been about winning. It had been about letting an old man answer for himself. Before Louise closed the van door, Bernard looked at Vernon through the open gap. "I didn't say all of it," he admitted. His voice was thin but steady. Vernon stepped closer. "You said enough." Bernard looked down at the keys. "I thought if I said it out loud, it meant I was betraying my son." Vernon shook his head once. "No, it meant you finally stopped betraying yourself." The word stayed with Bernard as the van eased out of the clinic lane at 10:07 p.m. Its taillights soft red in the rain. Trevor watched until it turned onto the wet county road beyond the clinic lights, then looked at Vernon with a face stripped of charm. "You have no idea what you just did," he said. Vernon's answer was calm. "I heard what he couldn't say. That was the promise of the night, and it had been kept." Bernard had whispered about keys, but the bikers heard the fear underneath. They heard the silence after every excuse. They heard the way Trevor answered questions meant for his father. They heard the clink of stolen independence in a coat pocket. And instead of turning it into a scene, they turned themselves into a wall. No raised hands. No threats. No noise. Just enough presence for the truth to find room. 8 mornings later, after a senior advocate had helped him set up a basic safety plan, Bernard returned to Hollow Creek Veterans Outreach Clinic for his follow-up appointment. The sky was pale, the parking lot dry, and his blue 1998 Buick LeSabre was parked carefully between the white lines near the second light pole. Janice saw him through the glass doors first. He walked slowly, using the same brown coat, but something in his shoulders had changed. He was still old, still hurt, still a father who loved a son who had crossed lines love should never cross. But he was no longer waiting for permission to exist. Vernon happened to be there with Curtis, dropping off donated winter jackets for the clinic's veteran pantry. Bernard lifted his key ring slightly when he saw them. The brass gear caught the morning light. "I drove myself," he said. Curtis smiled. Neil nodded. Vernon only looked at the Buick, then back at Bernard. "Started clean?" Bernard gave a small laugh. "First try." They did not ask what would happen with Trevor. Real life rarely fixes itself in one clean ending. There would be calls, paperwork, hard conversations, maybe forgiveness one day, maybe distance. But Bernard had an advocate now. He had transportation options. He had a plan to keep his own documents, his own appointments, and his own keys. Most of all, he had heard himself say no and survived the sound of it. As Vernon turned to leave, Bernard called after him. "I forgot what it felt like to hold them." Vernon looked back. "Then don't let anyone make you forget again." Bernard stood beside the old Buick for a long moment before opening the driver's door. He did not rush. He placed both hands on the wheel, breathed in the familiar smell of worn cloth seats, old peppermint candies, and rain-dried vinyl, and closed his eyes for one quiet second. Then he started the car himself, and for the first time in months, the sound of that old engine felt like permission returning. If you believe in the true brotherhood and kindness of bikers, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.